The South African Jewish Board of Deputies has continued to raise concerns about South Africa's position on the war between Israel and Hamas. Now, the South African Parliament recently resolved to expel the Israeli ambassador to South Africa and cut diplomatic ties until Israel agrees to a United Nations-led peace process. However, Israel had already recalled its ambassador for consultation. The board has also condemned the presence of a Hamas delegation who were in South Africa to attend a civil society peace meeting. Karen Milner, National Chairperson, South African Jewish Board of Deputies, joins me on the show now. Thank you so much for your time, Karen.
Good evening. Thank you, Dapo.
All right, great. Now, let's, of course, start the conversation with your take on the current war between the Israeli forces and Hamas.
So the Board of Deputies regards the current war as absolutely tragic, and we certainly mourn and have enormous sympathy and compassion for the loss of life on both sides. We would pray, along with, I'm sure, everybody else in the world, I would hope, for the end of this terrible war. But we have to say that that requires, of course, the hostages that have been taken hostage to be released. And for that is the fundamental requirement. And we call for the release of hostages so that this terrible war can end.
Now, we, of course, going by what we've seen so far, we've seen that a lot of, when it comes to civilians, have been hit, on the Gaza Strip, even though Israel keeps justifying its war, against Hamas, saying that what happened, where about 1,200 Israelis were killed in that sudden ambush, and of course we know that people have been held hostage. At this point of the war, now, on both sides, are there any form of justification for what is going on in terms of casualties recorded?
Well, I think the key issue here is to say that this war can end. And I think that there's not enough calling and recognition for how this war can end. We saw a ceasefire occur when Hamas released hostages. So we could see a ceasefire occurring, civilians stopped, there were no more bombings, humanitarian aid entered into Israel when they released the hostages, and then Hamas stopped releasing the hostages. So that there is a simple way to end this war, and that is for Hamas to release the hostages. I cannot see how there is any other way to end this war other than for Hamas to release the hostages. So for me, it's really the onus is on Hamas at this stage to release the hostages, protect the innocent civilians of Gaza by ending the war.
Now, South Africa has referred to the Israeli Prime Minister, that's Benjamin Netanyahu, to the International Criminal Court, and its parliament also resolved to cut ties with Israel until Israel accepts a lasting ceasefire. Now, what's your reaction to the role of South Africa so far in all of this?
So we really do regard South Africa as having the potential, or we did regard South Africa as having the potential to play a role in negotiating an end to this war, because they have been proven successful in the past. South Africa's own peaceful transition to democracy is really a model for many countries of how to bring peace about in a warring or in a country in such difficult circumstances. Unfortunately, though, the position that the government has always taken and the position that the ruling party, the ANC, has always taken in just about every country, every conflict around the world, including, for example, Russia and Ukraine, where they have agreed that you need to talk and engage with both sides in order to make peace. But for some reason, when it comes to Israel, the government and the ruling party have gone against their own policy. And instead of talking and engaging with both sides, as we said, Parliament, so Parliament doesn't determine whether or not South Africa has relationships with other countries, but Parliament, led by the EFF and supported by the ANC, called for the removal of the Israeli ambassador to South Africa. That goes against every single thing that the ruling party, the ANC, and the government have done in relation to every single other conflict. So on the one hand, we would hope that the government would be able to play a role in bringing desperately needed peace to the region. On the other hand, if you reject and expel one of the sides that you want to make peace with, you are making your own position irrelevant.
Now, we also understand that a Hamas delegation has been to South Africa at the height of this particular crisis. And your organization actually did release a statement saying it is disgusted. Can you explain why?
So I think that we've seen more and more evidence coming out about what happened on the 7th of October, including, and the evidence is quite incontrovertible, including mass rape of women, slaughter of children, babies, people at a concert, and of course the taking of hostages. So on the one hand, the government calls to expel the parliament calls to expel the Israeli ambassador, and then Hamas is welcomed by the ruling party. And I mean, I think it's pertinent to mention that this is a time around the world where we're talking about violence against women. So at a time when the whole world is talking about activism in terms of violence against women, not a word of condemnation, not a word of sympathy for the women who were raped and murdered by Hamas is uttered. Instead, the people who are responsible for those rapes and murders are brought into this country. And there is no other word for it but to say that it is horrifying.
Now, on a broader perspective, we know that, let's look at the position of the West. We've seen the likes of America and, of course, the United Kingdom back Israel, wholeheartedly in this war. And Israel has maintained that even if there are multiple ceasefires, it will continue to push on this war till it puts Hamas, to extinction. Now, my question to you is this. Let's look at the role of Western countries like the US and the UK. Are they helping matters to sort of find a lasting solution to the problem on ground?
So I think in order to, we really need to answer that question in relation to Hamas's own stated aims when it comes to this war. So Hamas has said in public that they will repeat the attacks of the 7th of October again and again and again and again and again, effectively until they have wiped out Israeli citizens. So against that background, and they have proven their willingness to do that. So against that background, you have to take them at their word, you have to believe them. And it's against that background that there is an understanding, I think, amongst Western democracies that there cannot be a lasting peace in the region while Hamas is in charge in Gaza. Hamas has never been, it was democratically elected, but there hasn't been an election for years in Gaza. Currently, I don't think you can argue that it's a democratically elected government. It's an authoritarian, totalitarian government that has sworn to continue these attacks given the opportunity. I'm not sure how any country could accept such a grouping on its border.
Now, there are also speculations that, of course, not speculations this time, proposals that the Israeli Prime Minister, that's Benjamin Netanyahu, should be held for war crimes, given the amount of casualties recorded, right? What's your reaction to this?
So I always have to, my only comment there, and I'm not a lawyer, so I can't really comment on what the legal position is, but everybody who calls on Netanyahu to be held account for war crimes, not one of them mentioned Hamas. So again, there just seems to be this bizarre disjunct between a country defending the rights of its citizens and a country or a grouping from Gaza who came in, remember Hamas broke the ceasefire. There was a ceasefire in place at that point, who came in the 7th of October. I don't think that there's any argument whatsoever. You don't have to be a lawyer to know that hostage taking, for example, is a war crime. Rape is a war crime. So when people come out and lay all of this on Israel, the only response is, we don't understand.
Why? I mean, one might want to say, though, the reason why some Why people are actually saying that is, if you look at in terms of casualty, I mean, officially on the part of Israel, it's been reported that about 1,200 have been affected, while on the part of the Palestinians and of course the Gaza Strip, the casualty attributed to Israel goes to hundreds of thousands. So
not hundreds of thousands.
Okay, maybe clear. Not hundreds of thousands, but a substantial amount.
Okay. So not even Hamas say it's hundreds of thousands of civilians who have been killed in this war. And I do think that the death of every single civilian is an absolute tragedy. Unfortunately, though, the reality is this is a war, and the war is in pursuit of two things: in pursuit of the release of the hostages, firstly, and secondly, to ensure that this can't to defend a country against a group on its borders that say that they will do it again and again and again. And I'm not quite sure what else can be done against that context. This war can end. It can end with the release of hostages. So why this blame is being laid at the foot of Israel, again, is something that feels very disjunctive in terms of what the facts are on the ground. There is a terrible, and I'm not minimizing it for 1 second, there is a horrifying war going on at the moment. War is horrific.
All right, now okay.
Quite sure how many people should be, I don't know what the answer is in terms of numbers. Would people feel better if thousands of Israelis had been killed?
Of course,
the
definitely not.
It's a defensive war for Israel, and I'm not quite sure why the responsibility, when it was started by Hamas, when Hamas can end it, is still sitting with Israel.
All right. Now, I would like to ask, of course, what this portends for the Jewish community, particularly resident in South Africa, given the sort of perceived stance of the South African government on this war.
So I think it's very difficult for a Jewish community to live in a country where we see the hostility of a government to this extent. And I've mentioned before, not because, and I want to be clear, not because we have a problem with the pro-Palestinian stance of the government. I think there are many people, including myself, who believe you can be both pro-Palestinian and wish for a Palestinian state living side by side in peace with Israel. So it's not because of the Palestinian position that the government is taking, but something like Hamas, who, as I said before, and I'm not going to go through the atrocities they have committed before, their stated aims, including stated aims which extend, or we feel often extend, to threats against Jewish communities around the world. When the government keeps supporting that kind of narrative, it makes Jews in South Africa feel uncomfortable and unwelcome. Having said that, though, there is a very, very large community in South Africa, particularly a Christian community in South Africa, ordinary South Africans, who we know don't support that government stance, and that makes us feel much more comfortable and much more at home in South Africa.
Now, in terms of solution to this particular issue, some have suggested, a two-state system, I mean, release of hostages. Some have also suggested maybe interventions of some, what I call key stakeholders in all of this. What would you propose as a permanent solution to what we are seeing right now at the Gaza Strip?
So a permanent solution has to be I believe, has to be a two-state solution. It was the solution envisaged in 1947, 1948, right at the outset of the establishment of the State of Israel. At that point, the United Nations proposed two states. Unfortunately, the Arab countries around Israel didn't accept the two-state solution and attacked Israel immediately. Since that time, there seems to be no other answer but to suggest that two states live in peace, side by side with one another, is the only possible way to resolve this in a way that is sustainable and long-lasting.
But do you see this happening?
So, I mean, I think that it's hard to comment on that in the context of a war. At the moment, the immediate answer, of course, is for hostages to be released, a proper ceasefire to be put into place, and under that proper ceasefire, where Israel finds reasonable partners for negotiation, I have to believe it. I believe in peace. I believe in hope. I do not believe that ongoing war and ongoing terrorism is sustainable. So I actually do believe that the adults on both sides will come together around the negotiating table and will find a way that the two countries can live in peace with one another for the sake of both of their citizens.
Now, what other avenues, is your organization actually exploring to sort of pressure the South African government to adjust in its stance on this war?
So we have engaged mainly with the ANC, with the ruling party. We have had conversations with the ruling party, and it's always difficult for us. We're always willing to engage, and we're always willing to discuss things. That is our position. You don't get peace without a willingness to negotiate and without a willingness to engage. But having said that, the presence of Hamas in this country, the way that Hamas has been treated, the lack of condemnation of the Hamas atrocities, and the very muted calls for the release of the hostages does make us less hopeful that the government will listen to us. And that's a great pity, because we've seen a huge upsurge in anti-Semitism in South Africa. And this is a country that actually has had historically very, very low levels of anti-Semitism. So my role actually is not a role. My role typically doesn't involve engagement with Israel. My role is really around protecting South African Jews, the vast majority of whom are Zionists. So for me, the fact that the government is so close to this organization, which did such horrific things and which is so threatening to Jews, that's very worrying.
Of course, Karen Milner, thank you so much for your time. National Chairperson, South African Jewish Board of Deputies. Once again, thank you for your time, Karen.
Thanks very much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. And that's a wrap on the show today. Let's do this again some other time. My name is Dapo Adegboye. Bye for now.